joined by Wayne Madsen, of course, NSA whistleblower and investigative journalist, to discuss ISIS and a whole host more. Wayne Madsen, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. First off, I mean, we're going to get into ISIS soon. I wanted to get your quick take. I don't know how closely you've been following it on the Ebola outbreak, of course, because we've had this botched response from the CDC, it seems, the first two cases there in Dallas. Do you think that this is merely incompetence on behalf of the public health authorities, or are we seeing some kind of deliberate malfeasance?
Well, I just returned from a conference in Tehran last week, and of course, Tehran, in my mind, was going to be a great place to find out all about ISIL or ISIS or whatever you want to call this group. But I actually discovered some things about Ebola while I was there, which I didn't think I would in that particular venue. First of all, one of my colleagues, Dr. Randy Short, produced a patent for the Ebola virus from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. It was patented a few years ago, has a barcode on it. It's a government document. That was a little bit surprising, but what was even more surprising is when I took a tour through the former torture chambers of the dreaded Shah's secret police, the Savak, and discovered that the head of that particular unit, a guy named Parvez Sabati, has been living here in the United States for over 30 years in Orlando, operating a business out of a P.O. box and out of private residences. And his daughter, who serves on his board for one of these companies that doesn't have a real address, it turns out that she was responsible at Harvard. She's a Harvard biologist for mapping the Ebola virus from an animal gene pool to the human gene pool. Now, you put the patent together with that kind of information. Here's somebody whose father was a brutal torturer, and you have to wonder what is behind this sudden outbreak of Ebola, which we had an outbreak in Zaire. It's actually called the Zaire Ebola virus some years ago, but it was eradicated in Zaire, now Congo, Democratic Republic Congo. How come it all of a sudden appears in these three West African countries that have been rife with civil wars and coups d'etats brought about mostly by countries that are after their natural resources, gold, diamonds, and iron, and of course, Israel figures very big in that operation. They've been responsible for an attempt to overthrow the government of Guinea, and they were involved in supplying both sides in the very bloody civil wars in both Liberia and Sierra Leone. I'm very suspicious about Ebola, and especially where we saw the outbreak in the hot zones right now in those three countries.
Let's turn to ISIS then, because over the weekend we had ISIS almost taking the town of Kobani in Syria. They're making advances in western Baghdad. I mean, the U.S. offensive against ISIS, the airstrikes, only seem to have bolstered ISIS. Now they're expanding their spread throughout the region. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, and who is this ISIS? I spoke to Islamic scholars in Tehran who said this group has absolutely nothing to do with Islam. It has a lot to do, of course, with Saudi Arabia, which practices a very heretical form of Islam known as Wahhabism. They, on the other hand, look at any other Islamic sect, whether Shia, Sufis, or even other Sunni sects as apostates and heretics. But this Wahhabist sect was born out of the British Foreign Office and during the Ottoman reign. It's not real Islam. And then you look at ISIL, and you look at the fact that there's 12,000 foreign mercenaries from 81 different countries, including the United States, Canada, and many in Western Europe, who have no affiliation through marriage or family or anything with Islam. And you have to wonder, what is ISIL? Is this actually the implementation of something known as the Yinon Plan, formulated in 1982 by an Israeli journalist named Oded Yinon, which talked about breaking apart the other Arab countries surrounding Israel into warring factions. And that's exactly what we're seeing today in Syria and Iraq. And look who's been promoting these rebels, neocons like John McCain and the other neocons in the State Department, the same people who brought about the total destruction of Iraq as a nation. That's who's behind ISIL. And then you look at these demonstrations against Africans in Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel and by these right-wing settlers, and they're all wearing ISIL T-shirts and waving the ISIL flag. They even found a bag of ISIL flags. Some gardeners found a bag of ISIL flags, brand new flags that had fallen off a truck in northern Israel. I would suggest that ISIL is an operation that was formulated by the U.S., CIA, the Mossad, and Saudi intelligence in the person of Prince Bandar, and we know how dirty he is, especially his name's all over those missing 28 pages from that Joint Senate Intelligence Report on 9/11. So here are the real enemies of the United States, and we're told by idiots like John McCain that they are our allies. I'm afraid not, because on September 11th, the leading Eastern Christian patriarchs met with President Obama in the White House and told him there was no such thing as Syrian moderate rebels, that his support for the Syrian opposition had led and would lead to deaths amongst Syrian Christians and other minorities. And the same group was then spoken to by Ted Cruz, who's a Christian Zionist. And by the way, many Christians and even Islamic people well-versed in the New Testament told me in Tehran that the idea of Christian Zionism is a heresy to Christian religion. It's a heresy to the teachings of Jesus and what is in the New Testament. And there's no place in Christianity. You can't be a Zionist and a Christian at the same time. So I have news for people like Ted Cruz. He better make a decision on what he wants to be. He can't be both. And I would even suggest he can't be president. He was born in Canada. So his rhetoric is not helpful to this debate we see about what's going on in the Middle East right now.
We have a story here out of BBC News. Turkey allows Syria rebel training. Turkey has agreed to allow moderate Syrian rebels to be trained on its soil, the US says, in its bid to combat the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. We've also got Saudi Arabia training those so-called moderate rebels. We've got the United States sending them more money, more arms, and yet we know that these arms, in many cases, fell directly into the hands of ISIS. And in fact, those so-called moderate rebels defected to and joined up with ISIS and gave them those arms that they had received from the likes of Jordan, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, in addition to Turkey. So, Wayne, I mean, to what extent is the US policy in Syria of destabilizing the Assad regime responsible for the growth of ISIS?
Absolutely connected to the growth of ISIL or ISIS, or as the Arabs call it, Daesh. This group, first of all, we know that McCain, with this fake PhD, Elizabeth O'Baghy, went into Syria last year and met with al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS. Their picture was taken with him. And they've tried to dance around this issue. But these ISIL guys are basically paid for by the Qataris and the Saudis. As a matter of fact, this coalition of Obama is a joke, because we're told that Saudi and Emirati and Qatari and Bahraini pilots are flying missions against this group in Iraq and Syria, when in fact I was told by a Syrian who was in Tehran with me that huge packages of cash have arrived in ISIL hands in Aleppo in Syria, complete with the Saudi and Qatari bank stamps on the wrappers around the cash. So this has to be the first time that we've seen military attack groups that they're also financing. Their home governments are financing. The whole thing's a ruse. I'm afraid that the U.S. is not attacking ISIL positions. It's attacking Syrian military positions, Assad positions. For example, the U.S. claims it attacked the city of Raqqa in eastern Syria. It was 2 days after ISIL forces left the city. So we see this time. The U.S. also attacked a Syrian Air Force base that had not been taken over by ISIL. It was in the hands of the Syrian Air Force. I would suggest that either Obama is lying to the American people, or his own military and intelligence services are not telling him what's going on the ground over there. Perhaps he should send private emissaries over there. As I was in Tehran, he should send people to Damascus and to Tehran and to Beirut and find out himself what's going on over there. Those Eastern Christian patriarchs certainly told him, and he seemed surprised when they said, "Oh, there's no such thing as Syrian moderate rebels." He seemed surprised at that. And this guy's supposed to be intelligent, and he's surprised by that. I'm surprised that he's surprised.
We'll be back with Wayne Madsen after the break. We're going to get into the beheading videos, which of course have aroused suspicion. They've served as a perfect propaganda tool for airstrikes on ISIS, and yet we're told they're being produced by ISIS militants. Also going to go to your calls for Wayne Madsen on ISIS, Ebola, and more. It's the Alex Jones Show live, Infowars.com. Stay right there. We're back live on the Alex Jones Show. We're talking to Wayne Madsen, investigative journalist and NSA whistleblower. Talking about ISIS, here we have a story out of Infowars.com, Kurt Nimmo. ISIS now capable of downing airliners at Baghdad airport. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad may soon fall prey to ISIS. They have the area surrounded, and they're armed with anti-aircraft missiles, thanks to our friends, the Saudi Arabians. Once again, we're going to get into Saudi Arabia's alliance with Israel, according to Wayne Madsen, coming up later in the show. But I just wanted to ask Wayne about these beheading videos. We had another hostage video supposedly produced by ISIS yesterday of the British journalist John Cantley. Wayne, you know, given that these videos, they only seem to bolster the case for U.S. military expansion in the region. They bolster the case for airstrikes targeting ISIS. Very emotional propaganda. Again, a lot of questions have been asked about these videos. Should we be suspicious as to their origin, given previous examples of so-called Al-Qaeda videos, which lead back to the Pentagon?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, it seems like these videos are quote unquote discovered by an organization in Washington that I've been looking at for a number of years, called the Search for International Terrorist Entities, or SITE. It's actually run by an Israeli Iraqi American named Rita Katz. And listen, they were the ones who discovered a lot of these fake bin Laden videos, and now they're discovering these beheading videos. I'm not suggesting that these people who have been killed ostensibly by beheading are not dead, but I think it's somewhat questionable as to whether they actually were beheaded live. And the whole thing looks like a bad grade B movie. And I think there's been some video forensics people who have looked at these videos and determined that there's a lot of fakery involved with their production. But, you know, after we saw the U.S. CIA compound stormed in Benghazi after the production of that trailer called The Innocence of Muslims, which was involved a lot of dodgy people in Los Angeles, including those in the porn industry. You have to wonder, where are these videos coming from? What is the intention? And are they what they are purported to be? I have serious doubts about whether these videos are in fact showing beheadings. Although I must say, I believe that those hostages are probably dead, unfortunately.
I mentioned Saudi Arabia earlier regarding their arming of ISIS with anti-aircraft missiles. You've got a new book out, The Star and the Sword, which alleges this alliance between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which was intimately involved in plotting the 9/11 attacks. So give us a rundown of some of that evidence and how this came to fruition regarding the connection to 9/11, Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Well, when I was actually on the trail of the perps behind 9/11, the one issue that came up is, you know, I was looking at the location of the 19 alleged hijackers. I was also looking at the location of about 120 Israeli art students. They weren't really art students. They were obviously intelligence officers and agents over here in the months leading up to 9/11. That they were identified in a Drug Enforcement Administration report as being involved in some sort of intelligence operation in the United States. I was looking at the fact that they and the 19 hijackers were living in the same locations in places like Hollywood, Florida, Irving, Texas, near Dallas Fort Worth International Airport, in North Jersey, very close to New York City, in places like Jersey City, for example, outside of Washington, D.C. and Laurel, Maryland, and other locations. And the problem was, was it the case where the Israelis were monitoring the hijackers? And if so, why didn't they inform us? Obviously, knowing the relationship, the close relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel, when it has existed since after, it predates Israel itself.
We'll be back after the break with more from Wayne Madsen, taking your calls, Infowars.com. Keep it locked in.
The globalist social engineers are not just targeting us with propaganda. They are manipulating our genetics. We are being targeted at every level by estrogen mimickers that lower our testosterone and other hormones and natural compounds that the body needs. After consulting top doctors, nutritionists, pharmacists, and others, we have developed what I believe is the ultimate non-GMO organic super male vitality formula, sourced from powerful organic herbs and then concentrated for maximum potency. Super Male Vitality was developed to activate your body's own natural processes instead of using synthetic chemicals. Super Male Vitality by InfoWars Life is so powerful that I only take half the recommended dose. For a limited time, we are offering 15% off Super Male Vitality at InfoWarsLife.com to introduce you to this powerful supplement. Visit InfoWarsLife.com today to secure your Super Male Vitality. InfoWarsLife.com.
We're back live on the Alex Jones Show, going to your calls for Wayne Madsen here in a minute. Just before the break, Wayne was talking about the connection between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and 9/11. Wayne, just finish up your thoughts on that subject, the alliance, the involvement in 9/11.
Well, people would say, well, why would Saudi Arabia support 9/11? Because 15 of the 19 alleged hijackers were Saudi nationals. But we've seen this time and time again. The Saudi Arabians have, of course, paid bin Laden off not to attack the kingdom. And all of Saudi Arabia's national security infrastructure is geared to one thing: protection of the royal family. And Israel and Saudi Arabia always have had common enemies. And the big one right now is Iran, where I just returned from. Even Saudi Arabia has provided basing agreements and forward location storage areas for Israeli weapons in the event Israel decides to strike Iran and their alleged nuclear facilities, which I basically ascertain there is no nuclear weapons program in Iran. The CIA was right in 2003 when they made that determination, and that determination is still valid. And anything Netanyahu says to the contrary is just typical propaganda from him and people who support him and his government. But the Saudis, the Qataris, the Bahrainis, the Emiratis, and the Israelis all have the same common enemy. And ISIL is not going to stop at the Iranian-Iraqi border. There already are reports that ISIL units are inside Iran and that they're cooperating with these MEK Mujahideen Calc terrorists that were once supported by the U.S. and Iraq. And they, of course, are supported by leading neocons like Richard Pearl and Rudy Giuliani. So here again, we see the same players involved, the same people that benefited from 9/11 now benefiting from this ISIL rampage across the Middle East and the total destruction of the modern Arab nation states, which has always been in the interests of Saudi Arabia to get rid of the secular governments of Iraq and Syria. And of course, Iran is next on that list. And also the Israelis, who always wanted to see Arabs kill Arabs and Muslims kill Muslims, because that blood, they actually profit when there's that kind of bloodshed.
So basically, ISIS are pawns that they can move around the globe, move around the Middle East to justify military intervention.
They're not even Muslims. They claim they're Muslims. They claim they're establishing a caliphate. As a matter of fact, I spoke to representatives of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah in Tehran, and all three groups stated that this ISIL is not Islamic, and they consider them to be an enemy of these groups. And for Netanyahu to suggest that Hamas and ISIL are the same thing, he's lying again. The only thing that man knows how to do is lie. If we wanted allies to fight ISIL, if Obama wants a real coalition, we should make peace with Assad and join him and the government of Iran, and then also supply weapons to Hamas, Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad, because they will go in and wipe these guys clean if we were to. But that's not that. That's my dream team, to get rid of ISIL. But of course, it's not going to happen, because our foreign policy has been hijacked by external interests that do not have the national security concerns of this country first at hand.
Okay, we're going to go to your calls now. Gennaro in Arizona, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Thank you, David and Wayne, for taking my call. A couple of things. You hear the FBI director, James Comey, criticizing Apple and Google about developing encryption to secure, so secure that even police and the NSA can't even access. I mean, I just think that is the most ludicrous, absurd statement to make, especially on the heels of the iCloud photo scandal. It's obvious that, like you said, David, that was a smokescreen because Apple needs to sell their products. And Tim Cook came out and admitted and said, oh, our phones are so secure, the iOS 8, we can't even give your information out. I mean, Wayne, my question for you is, regardless of any kind of encryption, if the NSA or the government wants to get to your information, they're going to get it. And I'm sure that they have very sophisticated ways of getting it wirelessly. They're not going to need, a warrant to go and get information from Apple or Google. So what is your comment on that?
Yeah, this is a battle I fought with other privacy advocates back in the 90s. Some people may recall the Clinton administration's plan to implement something called the Clipper chip, where you would be able to encrypt your data, but you would have to give your encryption key over to the government, who would then share it with NSA or the FBI if they had a court order. That we didn't believe that was the mechanism they were going to use. And Comey is just like Louis Freeh was back in those battles in the 90s. They do not want encryption used by private citizens or businesses, because they want to have real-time access to encrypted communications without going through any steps. But you're right, NSA, given enough time, they're building this huge supercomputer at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, by the way, that will be able to decrypt anything within probably seconds. Yeah, if they want it, they're going to get it. But the people that are penalized, as you suggest, not that I'm interested in the bottom line of Google or Apple, but it does hurt their foreign sales when there are these restrictions placed on encryption, and also their domestic sales for people that are worried about their private data being compromised. And I had to laugh. I was recently looking at some ads inside the DC Metro, and they were advertising government clouds. Like that's some sort of security for these government agencies. It was AT&T actually that was advertising it. I can't think of anything more ludicrous than a government putting its sensitive data in a cloud. I can't believe anybody would put their sensitive data in a cloud.
Thanks for the call. Also, Wayne, there was a comment by Google's Eric Schmidt a couple of days ago. He gave a speech saying that basically NSA surveillance threatens to break the internet. Now, this was the same guy who said, if you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. I mean, is it a sign that the NSA surveillance has so destabilized the very structure of the internet that even people like Eric Schmidt are now paranoid that it could break the entire World Wide Web?
Well, perhaps maybe Eric Schmidt should have discussed this with Keith Alexander at the several Bilderberg meetings they attended together. Maybe he should have expressed his concerns then before this got out of hand. But yeah, it's typical. These CEOs from the Silicon Valley companies and all these other high tech companies. At first, they defend NSA, or at least they don't say anything critical of them, and then they find out, oh my God, it's worse than I thought. But yeah, he had more than enough opportunity to make these concerns known personally to Alexander, and I'm sure he will in the future when Alexander's replacement, Admiral Mike Rogers, attends these same conclaves. It seems like Bilderberg loves to have the NSA director at all their meetings these days. So let Schmidt and these other high-tech gurus complain to them in person at the next one.
JJ in Texas, you're on the air with Wayne Madsen. Go ahead, JJ.
Hey, Mr. Madsen. Good to talk to you today. How's it going over there?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I have a comment about 9/11 since that came up. Isn't it strange that our government flew out the family of the wanted hijacker behind 9/11, Osama bin Laden? All his family got to fly out. Isn't that a false flag there, number one? And number two, isn't it true that Pakistan's intelligence is called ISI?
Yes.
Is there any correlation between ISIS and Pakistan?
That's not determined, except one thing I discovered in Iran, that we now know that ISIL is crossing over the Iraqi border into Iran using some kind of open smuggling routes in the Kurdish area in the northern part of Iran, where a lot of stuff that's basically illegal in Iran is smuggled by mostly Armenian businessmen, things like beer, for example, and at ISIL's using these same smuggling routes to get their people across. At the same time, Pakistan, there's a group there called Jundallah, which is a Baluchi terrorist group that's supported by the United States. Depending on what day of the week it is and how much money is being paid off by the CIA, this Jundallah will make forays into Iran and commit terrorist attacks. Now, Pakistan sometimes cracks down on this group, and that's ISI, that's the Pakistani intelligence service. But other times, if they're paid off, they leave this group alone. So that's the only. But you can see the problem. If ISIL goes into Iran from the west, and Jundallah decides to go in from the east, that's sort of a pincer action. And then with the MEK active also on the border, obviously we could see this situation spreading to Iran in a very bad way. As far as the bin Laden family was flown out of the United States, so there wasn't really that we were told there was this no-fly policy. There were a lot of planes flying after 9/11 we weren't told about. One of which was the 747 that took the bin Laden family and dropped them off in Paris and Geneva. And they flew in from various locations around the country. Yeah, we protected bin Laden's family, but we did very little to protect the first responders who have died and are very sick in New York and Washington, D.C.
JJ, thanks for the call. Vac in Wisconsin, you're on the air with Wayne Madsen. Go ahead, Vac. Vac's gone. We've got Tom in New Jersey. You're on the air, Tom. Go ahead.
Good day, Mr. Madsen and Mr. Watson. My question, Mr. Madsen, is the Mr. Duncan in Dallas, Texas. They're calling him Patient Zero, but Patient Zero happened last year in December in Guinea, I believe. It was a 2-year-old boy. The origin of Ebola, they're trying to say, is either, of course, infected animal corpses or fruit bats. But they leave out the last shell, which could be, of course, a 2-year-old boy getting vaccinations.
Yeah, I tell you, when they talk about the guy who died, Mr. Duncan in Texas, as being Patient Zero, obviously we know that there are now maybe 5,000 people in West Africa who have died of this disease, and I may be lowballing that number. We're not getting, and for Obama to send the military over to deal with a public health issue, I really question whether AFRICOM, which was designed to protect U.S. business interests, oil interests, and other interests in Africa, is well placed to deal with this a developing pandemic in West Africa. So one thing the military does do when they go into an area, they tend to keep nosy journalists out. They put what's called an information cone over the area where no independent news goes out. That's what I'm very skeptical and suspicious about with Obama's deployment of troops into West Africa.
Okay, thanks for the call. Yeah, so picking up on that, Wayne, I mean, we've seen Chinese economic expansion in Africa outstripping the US. So do you believe that this Ebola outbreak and other so-called crises like that are being used as pretext to send US troops into the region to establish strongholds that will later benefit economically the US military-industrial complex in that region?
It could very well be. You know, we're already in there to fight these groups that are active now in West Africa as a result of the neocons' foolhardy project to, get rid of Gaddafi in Libya. That just turned out all this weaponry and these jihadists who are now active in Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger and with Boko Haram in Nigeria and Ansar Dine in northern Mali. And other countries. So these American troops are supplementing troops that are already in West Africa. Now, the one country that has provided top shelf medical care to West Africa is Cuba. And we know because of this ridiculous quarantine or boycott we've had against Cuba, they've developed this medical system that is far beyond anything we have in the United States that's affordable. And they have dispatched their doctors to West Africa. And so Cuba dispatches top quality doctors and we send the military in. I mean, you just got to wonder who's in charge of things in Washington, D.C. And when, and the people in West Africa know that that they see these Cuban doctors they're going to start getting the best medical care available. And I don't care what Ileana Ros-Lehtinen and her gang of gusanos in South Florida have to say about it. Those Cubans are needed in West Africa, and if anything, we should be using our military planes to fly more Cuban doctors over there.
Switching topics now, Ukraine, I know this is something you've been focusing on in the past. We've seen a kind of quieting of tensions in recent weeks. We've had a ceasefire, Putin withdrawing troops from eastern Ukraine. Do you see that crisis as ebbing away, or is it going to spark back into life here in the near future?
Well, that crisis is now going from sort of the battlefield to the corporate boardrooms throughout Europe and also the Middle East, because winter is now approaching. And this idea of sanctions on Russia, which affects their ability to ship their natural gas and other energy supplies to Western Europe, is really starting to impact on Western Europe. And we already seen now unemployment rise in Germany as a result of this ill-conceived sanctions against Russia. French farmers are now dumping their produce that they would normally sell to Russia in town squares. And all we get from Francois Hollande, the French president, is more talk about more EU sanctions. Look, that was a coup d'etat in Kiev by a bunch of neo-Nazis and fascists. And it was Victoria Nuland at the State Department who promoted that. And now we have a German news report that the Ukrainian army, they wear helmets with swastikas and SS symbols on them. I mean, this is, no wonder Russia doesn't, you do something like that, and Russia remembers what happened in World War II. 25 million Soviet citizens lost their lives as a result of the German Nazi attack on Russia. And to have Ukrainian troops wearing Nazi helmets going in to kill Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine, I would have reacted as much as Putin did.
Okay, coming up after the break, your calls for Wayne Madsen, 1-800-259-9231. Stay right there, Infowars.com. We're back on the Alex Jones Show live talking to Wayne Madsen. Going to go to another of your calls here in a minute. But the great line of health products at Infowars.com continues to impress. And now we've got X2. With all the madness going on in the world, you need to get your supply of Ultra Strength Survival Shield X2. This is nascent iodine. And of course, I take iodine back home. It tastes like absolute garbage. This doesn't have that bad taste that's associated with many of the common iodine solutions on the market. It's time to get prepared with Survival Shield X2 from InfoWarsLife.com. Secure yours at InfoWarsLife.com and store it in your preparedness pack or home cabinet. Of course, iodine protects against radiation exposure. It's also got many other health benefits, purifies your system, and the X2 solution is available at InfoWarsLife.com. Final call for Wayne Madsen. It's Julio in Wyoming. Julio, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Good afternoon to both, Wayne. Been a big fan of yours for a while. It's also nice to see my former senator, Mark Kirk, have some nice comments for you, Wayne Madsen. He had some positive things to say about you, so it's nice to see Mark Kirk showing his true colors. I want to ask you, I've spoken to you about this before, about how big blackmail is and how so many of these political actors are, pretty much hold to a noose because of blackmail. And we know our good friend Barry Soetoro and his relationships with Mr. Sinclair or Reggie Love. All of these actors are blackmailed. Can you elaborate on that? And secondly, Vice Media. I know that you've written so many articles on your website about Vice, and they have Uncle Rupert's money as well as Uncle George's money, Soros and Murdoch behind it. They covered Ukraine. You talked about the neo-Nazis. It's not surprising Vice Media would support what was happening in Ukraine when Senator McCain openly spoke at the Brookings Institute with Senator Murphy of Connecticut about a technocracy in Ukraine, and we know how technocratic regimes in Greece and Italy have worked thus far. So can you elaborate on those two issues?
Yeah, on Vice, of course, that's also involves Bill Maher, who produces their program on HBO. And I just would caution people about the news reports coming out of North Korea about the status of Kim Jong-un. Don't believe them, because a lot of them are being filtered through Vice. And they were the ones who accompanied Dennis Rodman over there on his trip. Take whatever they say with a grain of salt. We know that Bill Maher is an Islamophobe. We know that. Thank God Ben Affleck called him and that other clown Sam Harris out on their Islamophobia on the Maher program. But Vice not to be believed. That it's more trash journalism on blackmail. Oh yes, absolutely. You mentioned McCain, and what do they got on this guy? I mean, obviously he's blackmailed 3 ways from Sunday. They know he was singing like a canary to his North Vietnamese captors. For 6 months, he was giving operational schedules for U.S. Flights, attack flights into North Vietnam. He also was responsible for the terrible fire on the USS Forrestal that killed over 200 naval personnel, and he was the first guy taken off because they knew he was responsible because of his hotshot antics. They called him Johnny Wet Start because he would flame his engine out as a form of hazing.
We'll be back after the break with Wayne Madsen. I'm going to take one more call. Stay tuned. This is Infowars.com. Keep it locked in. It's the final hour of the Alex Jones Show Live. I'm Paul Joseph Watson, sitting in for Alex. We're talking to NSA whistleblower and investigative journalist Wayne Madsen. Going to go to another of your calls right now. The website for Wayne, by the way, is WayneMadsenReport.com. We're going to go to Austin in Michigan. You're on the air. Go ahead, Austin.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Good. Go ahead.
I was calling about a number of things. One of the things I wanted to ask about, I was thinking going on with Russia and Ukraine, as well as Ebola and stuff. Could that also be like, a preset, kind of a fog of war for things that might possibly be going on in North Korea or China that China's trying to do?
Well, I can. One thing about ISIL that I also discovered from talking to journalist colleagues that gathered in Tehran for this journalism, and many professors were there as scholars, whatnot, is that ISIL's leadership was controlled by some North Africans. And a couple of weeks ago, the CIA and their other controllers went in and had Chechens from the Republic of Georgia and Uyghurs from Western China basically killed their mostly Tunisian commanders. They actually beheaded them in Syria, and they took over. And the idea is that the Chechens from Georgia and the Uyghurs from Western China, after they take care of Iraq and Syria and Iran, are going to go after Russia and China, respectively. So there's more to this whole ISIL story than we're being told. And I think all the suspicion should go on CIA Director John Brennan, who made the pilgrimage to Mecca. He's very close to the Saudi regime. He's the guy who's been promoting these radical takfiris in ISIL, and he's the guy who really needs to have his head on a stake, and no one else, because he's the guy who is ultimately responsible for this group being created.
Anthony in Florida, you're on the air. Go ahead. Quick question.
Yes, I have two questions for Mr. Madsen.
Only time for one. Make it quick.
Okay. What does he think of the? What does he think of the fact that? Does he believe that China at some point might challenge the United States in the same way that Germany challenged the British Empire?
No, I think China is actually, look, China's history, recent history, they have never really attacked anybody except when they felt their security was threatened. The attack on North Korea during the Korean War was because we posed a threat to them. They are staking a claim to the South China Sea, just like we stake claims to our territorial waters. It's all about natural gas and oil, and Obama decided to pivot to Asia as a direct confrontation, military confrontation against China in China's own backyard. Asia's not our backyard, it's China's backyard, but Obama has decided he's going to not only take on Russia with Ukraine and other former Soviet republics, he's going to take on China in its own waters, its own backyard. Obama's playing with nuclear fire by going after Russia and China, and I'm afraid that whoever comes after him, whether it's Hillary or some knucklehead Republican, is going to continue those policies unless we get a president like a Jim Webb or a Rand Paul who doesn't want to continue this interventionist U.S. foreign policy. That has got to stop right now.
Okay, final 20 seconds, Wayne. Tell people how they can get your book.
Well, it's available on my website, WayneMadsenReport.com, that book and a number of others.
Okay, Wayne Madsen, NSA whistleblower and investigative journalist. Thanks for joining us on The Alex Jones Show today.
Alex Jones here to break down some exciting developments in the area of research concerning supplemental iodine. It's nothing less than phenomenal. I began to get into iodine a few years ago because it was helping me and my family so much get healthy and detoxify. And I used some of the mainline iodine supplements and they upset my stomach and I had some issues with it. Until I discovered a product being developed by Dr. Group, who I was already interviewing as an expert on my radio show, and I began taking the product before he actually rolled it out. You now know it as Survival Shield True Nascent Iodine that your body can really absorb. Then, about a year ago, he said, listen, if you think this is powerful, I'm going to come out with rare earth, deep earth crystals that are incredibly powerful that no one else has as a source for their iodine from between 7,000 and 12,000 feet, literally drilled out of the ground. You put it on a hot plate and it turns into the pure gas. No one else has 99.99% pure iodine. And the results that I personally have had have been life-changing. I was over 270 pounds. And with the iodine, exercise, and better diet, I have lost now more than 50 pounds total, and I'm continuing to lose the weight. I have more energy, my libido, all this crap came out of my skin. I believe our research is conclusive. This is the best iodine out there. And I know this for a fact. Nobody else has got iodine based on these pure crystals, ladies and gentlemen. This is innovating. This is trailblazing. And the best part is it helps fund Infowars.com, the radio show, the TV show, the whole media operation promoting true libertarian ideas. For a limited time, experience the ancient power of Survival Shield X2. Take advantage of this unprecedented 30% off Super Detox special at InfoWarsLife.com.